Hello, dear students. I just wanted to show you one ingenious Czech invention. Actually, we have been obliged by the government to wear a face mask at all times when we get out of the house. And of course, we have not been supplied with any face mask because there is not enough face masks for everybody. So everybody has started to sew own face masks like this, for example, with the tissue that you have at home. I told you that the Czechs are very ingenious, that they have these golden hands. I think once again one can see that because you will see everybody with a different type of face mask. It's just homemade. And whenever we go out of the house, we have to have one like that. So, welcome to our online course now for this week. I put up a presentation about the evaluation of the midterm exam so that you can check the right answers, that you can understand what maybe you did wrong, where you failed an answer and where you were correct. You have all done very well on the midterm exam. I hope it was not too difficult for you. I hope you are able to study and concentrate right now in these times while being confined at home. And today we continue with the acculturation process, which we will study for the next 2 weeks. So what I'm going to present to you today. I am actually in my office right now, so I hope the quality will be the same as of the video as you had last time. Let's see, this should work like that. So what will we learn? We will define the concept of acculturation. We'll do some frameworking again. We'll be looking into the differences between acculturation of individuals and groups. We'll look really into the acculturation process. What is it exactly? What are the different stages of it? We'll define a little bit the terms of acculturation stress and culture shock. And this will also be your participation question. And we will see how did you live this acculturation while you were in the Czech Republic. So here you have a definition, a little bit of frameworking. So acculturation are those phenomena which result when groups of individuals having different cultures come into continuous first-hand contact with subsequent change in the original culture patterns of either or both groups. So a very academic definition that defines a little bit what we are speaking about. We'll be looking a little bit also into the history of acculturation, because before it was considered acculturation was not acculturation, it was only assimilation. And today we will learn that this assimilation is only a phase of acculturation. It's distinguished, it's not the same anymore. And it doesn't also mean cultural change, it's only one aspect of it, and we'll look at all of these things. Here, just for illustration, you have some definitions that are coming from students from the last class in the midterm exam and how they defined acculturation. This is just what I wanted to show you so that you see that you don't need to use academic definitions, but you can use really on-hand definitions that are also very correct and describe it very well, this process of acculturation. So I told you that there was a high evolution of the term acculturation versus assimilation, because previously, for quite a lot of time, we thought that the only way that you can acquire a new culture is when you assimilate to it, which involves, of course, the loss of the original culture and identity in order to acquire a new one. Because it was said that the more we acquire a new culture, the more we necessarily have to lose our original one. Today we know that this is not true anymore, luckily, because the scientists previously and also social representation about acculturation was that the two cultures are mutually exclusive and it is difficult to maintain both cultures. It was seen as not possible, and I will show you very good examples of that. Today, luckily, we believe that acculturation is actually bidirectional, bidimensional. So people do not necessarily move only in one direction when they acquire a culture, but it's like a game between the two cultures. So you can maintain your original culture while you participate and you adopt the social behaviors and the norms of the new culture. One and the other is not excluded. And in the end, what results in the process of acculturation? Well, it's the relative involvement in the two cultures. Now, we've spoken a little bit about it already when we spoke about language. You have described, some of you who are bicultural or multicultural, that you are perfectly able to do that, to jump from one culture to another. And it is definitely possible, but it does involve some psychological changes, which we will speak about today and also in the next course. So what are all the processes involved in acculturation and what are their outcomes? It's a little bit the same type of mapping which we have done every time so far. We did it with emotions, we did it with cognitions. So here, what is involved when we speak about the process of acculturation? Well, of course, there's groups, individuals within those groups, some situational factors, and these all have different responses. And the outcomes of acculturation in individuals and groups can be studied in form of a hypothesis, considering the processes involved and the given personality, of course, as well. So I was a little bit in charge of this whole process while I was working in the Refugee Association in France. I was given the assignment, for example, that there is a group of Georgian refugees that wants to integrate into the French society, and I should try to find out a hypothesis on how these two cultures, French and Georgian culture, mutually probably will collide together. So how well will this acculturation of this social group, minority group of immigrants coming from Georgia not in the United States, but the country, of course, in Europe I'm talking about, how will it go? This was upon me to evaluate the possible hypothesis of their acculturation process, which of course is difficult. And what we do is that we try to understand the key features of the culture A and the key features of the culture B, and we try to understand the possibilities and where it might clash. How will the contact take place? What will happen in the cultural exchange? What might be the extreme differences in the key features of the culture? What might be the commonalities? And these key features, of course, will determine the nature of the contact relationship, of the possible contact. Because Americans will integrate differently, for example, in the Czech society than will Russians or than will Africans. So this is always what you have to take into account. Now speaking about groups, but of course also we can look at it from a lens of individuals. So the cultural changes can be minor or substantial. It can be a minor or a major disruption. I will show you some examples of it. I'll watch some videos of examples of acculturation. Here is a little example of key features coming from my last fall class. It's a little bit like the exercise that you did in the reading response 5, where we spoke about national character of Americans and Czechs. You will see that there are many aspects connected with it. So I asked them to state the key features of the Czech culture and to put them into positives and negatives. And what would they define as key features that they encountered at the very beginning when they came here. So you can read if these are coherent with the ones that you would state about the Czech culture. And here I would like you to watch a document about acculturation of African immigrants coming to the United States, because you will have a reading also about acculturation in America. And here in this video, some students have said they find it quite stereotypical. It's actually a National Geographic documentary. I think it shows very clearly how this process that I described in the last slide here can sometimes be really, really complicated. And it enters really the problematic. So I would like you to look at it, and you will have a little question about this video also in your participation question. Okay, so what are the psychological processes involved on an individual level and on a social level? So what is psychological acculturation? So we have individuals in culture A and B, which will be forced to have some behavioral changes, and which probably these behavioral changes will cause some acculturation stress. So again, these are all the situations that we have studied so far. For example, the situations in the trams, the staring, the fact that you have realized that you are loud on public transports, or that you are behaving differently than the Czechs. This is everything that falls under the category of behavioral change necessary for the acculturation. So this is called adaptation, but what does this adaptation do with us? How does it influence us? So there are some psychological and also socio-cultural processes involved that you need to activate in order to be able to actually acculturate and become functional in a new culture. And of course, this is highly dependent on the culture that you come from, but also on your personality. Are you a flexible person? Are you a person that is able to have some insight? What are your coping strategies? What are your cognitive appraisals? It all depends on these things. So which psychological changes are involved now? If we look at it really more in depth, what is complied in these different categories? So You have behavioral possibilities of adaptation. Some of them are external, like for example, the speaking, the dressing, like I showed you the example of the burkini. Some of you have noticed that you found that the people in Europe dress more formally than in the United States. Then, of course, eating habits, something very external that you very often have to adapt to. Tipping could be also one thing that you had to adapt to, maybe. Showing emotions, yeah, the display rules, and of course, identity. So all of these things could be considered as external factors that you might have to adapt to, that you might have to do some changes in order to be able to actually fit the new social norms. And whether you are able to do that and willing to do that highly depends on many other factors. So you see that the process of acculturation is quite complex every time, right? So if, for example, if you would be living in Czech Republic, would you change the way that you dress? Would you find it necessary? How would it make you feel? Would it be comfortable for you or not? The tipping, if you would live in Czech Republic, would it be comfortable for you to adopt the way that we tip in Czech Republic, or would you maintain the way that you tip in America? These are questions that you can ask yourself. Which psychological changes are involved? So in terms of internal adaptation, for example, if we have to adapt to all of these factors that are now new and different around us, how does this actually involve and influence our sense of well-being, our self-esteem? Because it does have effects on that. Suddenly you feel awkward. It's what you described in the situation in the tram. Do you feel like you are doing something wrong? Maybe it can start affecting your sense of yourself, whether you feel inappropriate, you can feel awkward. There's a lot of situations which people that are forced to do some acculturation describe. I will show you a clinical example in the next course where we will be speaking much more about that, about the psychological consequences. What is the socio-cultural level? It speaks about the competence in daily life. So how are you able to survive in a culture where you don't speak the language? Like you have described, going to do your groceries. For some students, it sometimes was a problem at the beginning when they encountered unfriendly cashiers or when they were not able to express what they wanted to do. One student was describing, for example, that she needed to have her computer repaired, and she was not able to tell the guy what was wrong with the computer, and she walked home and she felt really hopeless. So this can be the socio-cultural competence in your daily life, the practical aspects of living in the new society. Sometimes it can be quite difficult. So which other factors play a role in the outcome of acculturation? Before you go to the next slide, try to think about it. Now, we have now spoken a little bit, just illustrated a little bit, so the key features of the culture, the personality, the coping strategies, your willingness, your motivation. But if we look into acculturation from a very practical point of view, we will speak about the conditions of acculturation. So this is something that I always looked for when I worked in the Association of Immigrants, because this really influences actually the actual success of the acculturation. So what are the reasons of acculturation? Why do you go there? Do you go there to study, to live, or to work? And this, of course, influences it a lot. So many of you who maybe have sometimes had moments where you felt kind of uncomfortable in the Czech Republic, where the whole situation was a little bit too much to take in, you knew that you were only there to study. So this takes away a lot of stress. But if you are a person like I was, for example, a political refugee, knowing that I could not go back to the country, I was small, but this is more applicable for my parents. They knew that they would have to work in the new country. Then, of course, the situation is a whole lot different. The status in the new country, whether you are a refugee, exile, immigrant, whether you are an expatriate, or whether you are a student, so of course influences in the way that you will acculturate in the country and also the way that you are perceived. If you are a CEO of an international company and you are coming to another country, it's a whole lot of a different situation than if you are an immigrant. And especially now, we will speak about the situation of immigrants in the whole world in our last course. They're generally, unfortunately, negatively perceived right now because there's too much of them. So this, of course, influences a lot how this whole acculturation process will go and how you will be able to handle the whole process inside of you. Of course, the language. So one of my master theses in the university in France was about the influence on the self-esteem of an accent, because when you try to learn the language, but you keep your accent even after having integrated yourself in the culture, for example, for 10 years, but every time you open your mouth, the people still ask you where you are from, well, it sometimes can be very annoying and very exhausting. Yeah, and can even have an influence on your self-esteem. So this was my research subject, to find out how this influences us. And the visions of the future. Yeah, if you plan to stay in the country, or if your time of acculturation is somehow limited. Yeah, you wrote that many times in your essays, that knowing that you will stay here only for a short while, well, your motivations were completely different, right? So do I stay forever, or will I go home one day? And then, of course, the age of the acculturated. Yeah, you will acculturate yourself completely differently when you are a child, when you are in the middle of your life, when you are an elderly person. And then the family situation. Are you coming alone? Are you coming with your family? Yeah, then there's a whole group of complicated situations when you acculturate with your children. Often the moms, they live the acculturation pain twice, because they live the acculturation of their kids that have maybe a hard time in school, that are not accepted, that cannot find friends so easily at the beginning. And it can be very complicated in that sense too. So the suffering of acculturation is usually harder for the mother, because she's also experiencing the acculturation of her children. So these are some conditions that we always have to take into account, that we evaluate also when we have a clinical case. We try to understand what are the possible factors that make it more easy or more hard. So vast individual differences in psychological acculturation exist even among individuals who have the same cultural origin and who live the same acculturation conditions. Yeah, it's another thing. You can never say that a group of Americans, they will adapt all like that into the new culture, because there's always differences among every individual. Yes, that's not something new, that's evident. But you can make some kind of prediction or general hypothesis on how possibly what might be the factors that will be difficult and that will be easy, the commonalities, the differences. So, and here we come to our main topic of the presentation. I'm very sorry, this is in French, because it's coming from a French university. I specialized in acculturation, and we had everything in France. All these theories are actually coming from France, as it's very diversified and multicultural society. So I will, of course, translate all of that for you. Let me just find something to show you. So it is the curve of adjustment of the expatriate. Yeah, so what do we experience in the very beginning? We call it lune de miel, so it's called the honeymoon phase. So this is something that some students experience, some students don't really experience. What is it actually? It's a phase of euphoria, of energy. The differences that you encounter seem to be only slight. Sometimes they seem funny to you, they seem entertaining, they seem fresh. You see a new environment, you see new ways of doing things, and everything seems kind of like if you walk into Disneyland. This is something which is applicable for only the first period of the time that you are in the new country. So from the very first day up to almost like 1 month. So you experience that when you travel, of course. If you travel for 3 days to London, you will experience something like a honeymoon, yeah? Because everything is new, and our body, the responses to the new are always very pleasant in general. Yeah? Unless you don't experience a woman yelling at you the very first day on the tram, of course. But anyway, so this is the first phase. And then we usually, not all the time, of course, again, it's only a model. Yeah, it's not general that everybody experiences that like that. But once you start integrating the differences and really seeing them, really trying to, once you are really experiencing them day by day, you come into a phase which is called the cultural shock of the beginning. So this is really where you are starting to be a little bit disorganized, and you are starting to lose the energy. You are starting to be in a situation where you're kind of confused, you don't understand, the social manners are different, you don't know what it means. There can be situations such as we described that are, for example, on the tram, some situations where you may even experience some aggression or something whatsoever, some unpleasant things. And this is called the cultural shock of the beginning, yeah, which takes place usually somewhere around the 1st and 3rd months Now, again, this is a model based on some representative sample. Then we have the phase of superficial adjustment. So meaning that in order to survive in the given culture, you adjust as well as you can. So if we speak again about the different departments that we spoke about, socio-cultural, behavioral changes, adaptation to the external factors, you adapt in order to be able to function in the society and in order to avoid situations that might be unpleasant for you. So very simply put, if you are in a Muslim country, well, you will put a scarf on your head. You will cover yourself. If you have been in the Czech Republic, maybe you started talking a little bit less loud in order not to be stared at because you found it unpleasant to be stared at. Yeah, so simple things like that, but they are taking in progressively. You are doing these changes, and they are doing something with you as well, because adapting, changing, might not always be a pleasant process. What happens next, and this is usually in the period of 6 months to 1 year in general, is a phase of depression, where you kind of start to feel the loss. You feel the loss of the contact with your original culture. You feel like you are changing and you don't really know how. You kind of, sometimes even people can feel a certain sense of threat. And this is also why we say that actually the first year of adaptation into the new culture is the most difficult one. Generally, we say when people have really survived the first year, they're already a little bit more prepared, a little bit more emotionally stable, and they're ready to go to the phase of compensation and reintegration. And then, of course, if the acculturation is ideal, that's what we're looking for, is autonomy and integration. So that means that you learn to valorize the differences, the cultural differences, and you gain a new understanding of yourself. You maybe develop even a new personality, a new aspect of your personality that you didn't know. This is called the false self. We will be speaking about that the next time. And this also, of course, depends on how pleasant actually it is for you to live in the new culture. So for example, there are people, I had one girl, she was working for an NGO, she was Czech, and she was acculturating herself to Spain because she found that the way that Spanish express their emotions and the way that they live is much more pleasant for her. So she went only through the phase of honeymoon, adjustment, and autonomy and integration. She didn't go through the phase of depression at all, because actually her personality corresponded much more with the new culture. So this is very individual. But generally, this is how it goes. And the phase of compensation, reintegration is usually done during the first and the second year. So generally, like during the second year, people have somehow already started to really adapt to the new culture, and they have changed. They change and they develop new ways of doing things. But not always. We'll speak about cases when this does not happen correctly and when actually the people stay in the phase of depression, meaning that they don't want to connect to the new culture. They feel the loss of their original culture. Many times this unfortunately happens with elderly people who are disconnected from their social relations and now suddenly cannot find any new social relations anymore. So this is very current, that actually people stay in the depression and they can unfortunately stay in that depression for quite a long time. And then it becomes, of course, difficult. I've experienced that in my practice quite a lot, and we'll be studying some case studies in regards to this theme. So, if you have any questions to this curve, I'm really sorry that it's in French, but again, I could not find it in English at all. It's coming from my university course. If you have any questions to that, you can email me always, it's no problem. So, let's go on. Here is a little slide about my USA honeymoon and my phase of cultural shock. So when I first came to the United States, I was very, very impressed, and I loved very much the way that people express emotions there. It was something that completely shocked me, that I really actually enjoyed. And at the first months, I was really feeling like I was in Disneyland. Everybody was just so open. They were just communicating with anybody, with anyone, even in the elevator, even in the supermarkets, even if you didn't know the person. And of course, this was something that I hadn't experienced coming from a communist country where everybody is just like looking into the ground and not caring about anyone else because you are afraid. So this was something very, very positive for me. But then actually really, and it was really like in the curve, after the first months, I actually discovered that everybody's really open, but in reality, not everybody really cares about you. So it was my first time when somebody asked me, "How are you doing?" And I wanted to tell them that I'm actually not doing so well because I'm missing my parents, and I'm kind of homesick. So I was 14 years old, and I was trying to tell that to a person, and the person just walked away. And when that happened to me several times, I was thinking, what is this actually? So negative emotions are not part of small talk. This is something that I learned, and that was very shocking for me. And sometimes the artificialness of the emotions, yeah, you express them very highly, but not always they are actually really true. So then it, of course, jumped back to me, and I remembered my own culture, and I thought, well, maybe there are also positive aspects of my own culture where we don't express that much, but when we express, it's actually real. So this is why, actually, when you are confronted with a new culture, you become firstly so critical about your own culture, and then you actually come back to the good values of your own culture. I think this is one advantage of acculturation that takes place. But anyway, I had a great time with the Mormon community. They were very welcoming, and it was a very nice time there. Usually in class, I speak about it quite a lot, but now let's go on. So what can happen when we speak about acculturative stress? What is it actually? Like every other unfamiliar experience in the cultural context is likely to involve stress. It is a situation of stress. Acculturation is a challenge. It's not for everybody. And it can provoke, therefore, stress reactions, cognitive appraisals that are not pleasant, yeah, and is really putting a high demand onto your cognitive appraisals and your coping strategies. Yeah. One cannot always deal with acculturation stress by adjusting and changing the behavior. It's a good thing to say that, well, you just have to adapt, but it's not always possible. What if the values of the culture are completely against your own values? What if the values of the culture are something that you don't want to accept, or that is completely contradictory to what you have learned in your own culture? What do? Do you adopt these values, or are you going to be in a constant daily fight? So this is, of course, causing a very, very big issue. So acculturation of stress from a behavioral and from a cognitive perspective. During cultural transitions, people may lack the necessary skills needed to engage in the new culture. Not everybody is actually able to adapt this behavior. Not everybody has necessarily insight. So it requires that you have a learning approach, that you actually do the investment of trying to understand the other culture like you did. Again, in these tram situations, you try to understand why these people do what they do. Yeah, so you have to learn yourself the norms, the values. You have to invest in the communication, maybe also in the language. Yeah, so this requires a lot of skills and a lot of effort from you. From the cognitive perspective, so it's how people think about themselves and others in the face of intercultural encounters, because it also challenges us and what we actually think about the way that we are raised, about our values. We all question that. You all went through this process when you were questioning the values and the national character of the United States, when you were questioning the fact whether you are arrogant and loud because you are perceived that way, because this is the stereotype. Also, this is all the cognitive process that's involved there. Who am I? Which group do I actually belong to? Then we have developmental perspectives. So developmental issues in acculturation. That can be the age, of course, can be affected. Yeah, if you have been integrated into a culture, like is when we spoke about the parental transmissions and the societal transmissions. You have learned something in one country, and then suddenly you come in a country where it's completely different. Yeah, so this is very, very actual for children of diplomats who change every 4 years. It can be a really, really big issue. They can have signs of depression. They can have signs of not wanting to integrate themselves anymore, blocking, just stopping the social contact completely because they don't want to do this process of integration anymore. They're tired of it. As a construction of identity and cultural identity, which is taking place also, of course, in our childhood, in our adolescence, and we do need these roots that we put into the culture. We do need to belong. And if we are constantly taking these roots out, it really affects us in our childhood. But it depends on personality. For somebody, it's pleasant, but for somebody, it's really unbearable. So personality, individual factors, yeah, individuals differ in the way that they engage in the acculturation process. And there is a very, very high link between personality and acculturation possibilities. So you can think about the 5 personality traits and who will probably, with which traits, be more able to adapt and to be more flexible in the acculturation. Maybe somebody with high extroversion, for him it will be easier to integrate into an extroverted culture. Somebody with openness to experience, well, he will also be very motivated to integrate into a new culture. But imagine a person who is introverted and who does not want to engage in new experiences, who is more conservative. And he has to travel and he has to make new social relations. Well, it will be very hard. So personality is a moderating factor. That's what I wanted to say about this. So possible psychological effects of acculturation stress that we will look into much more deeper in the clinical cases. And when we speak about the false self and about the possible consequences, it can be uncertainty. You feel uncertain about where you belong to, whether the values that you have been taught are actually good values. You can feel anxious about certain situations. As I said, you can even fall into a depression. One big effect of acculturation, unfortunately, is isolation, especially of social groups. And then, of course, it can also lead to different psychopathologies, which I will show you in our clinical cases. So, here we will speak a little bit more about actually the societal norm and the processes involved in acculturation. So variations into how individuals acculturate depend on actually 2 dimensions. There is cultural maintenance and cultural immersion. That is true for a culture as a group or for a group of people, subculture, but that is also true for the individual. So what is your motivation for your cultural maintenance? How much do you actually want to keep your own culture? How much dignity or pride do you have for your own culture? This is a very big factor. You spoke about it a lot in the national character. You said that Americans are very proud of who they are, of where they come from, of the freedom, of the democracy, of their flag. And therefore, the other factor is cultural immersion. How big is your motivation to immerse yourself in a culture? How much do you find it actually necessary? Or how much are you just satisfied with your culture of origin? This is very variable from individual to individual and also from culture to culture. And that sums up the 4 different acculturation strategies in terms of an individual or subcultural group and the success of the actual acculturation. So here you have the 4 different strategies of acculturation. The best one, of course, is either integration. It's maintaining one culture but interacting. So this would be the successful